Jaden. What's up, Jaden? Thought you were at work. Hey, Janet. Welcome, you guys. There probably won't be as many people here in this study tonight because Jose's at on a Zoom conference call for Josiah's back to school night, and Thika's at a birthday party right now, I believe. Oh, you're on your 15, all right. Cool. And then who else usually watches? And then also Lorena is at the same party. I'm good, Janet. How are you? I had a extremely great nap today, so I'm feeling re-energized. Also, I'm just asking one more time. Is the frame right on the camera? Because as I said last time, my camera here zooms in, and it sometimes I get the frame off and there's a bit of my room exposed at the top or on the sides. So just let me know if it's fully in frame, the backdrop. But the comments do come in late. Great subject tonight. Looks good? Okay, cool. Now I need to mark that on the floor so I know where to put it next time and I don't have to guesstimate. You'll notice it's particularly quiet in my house. Oh, hey, Lorena. It's particularly quiet because no one's here. But I don't know why I still felt the need to put the sign on my door just in case they found some way to knock on my door in the middle of the study. Even the sign doesn't work though. Okay, we'll just get started. So tonight, my Bible study about the resurrection was unintentionally the start to a apologetics series that I want to get going here in our Wednesday Bible studies. That's why this one is called Part 2, addressing, if you don't know what apologetics is, some people don't. There I go, excuse me. It's the defense of one's faith with evidence and historical facts and documentation and reasoning and stuff like that. So there's Christian apologists like Dr. Frank Turek, Dr. William Lane Craig, who else? Dr. Vodi Bakum. There's a bunch that I listen to. There's a bunch of them. There's Muslim apologists like Dr. Shabir Ali. There's all kinds. But tonight's particular study, we're going to talk about God being labeled a moral monster. Now, atheists and even agnostics, or not usually people of a different faith, but it's usually atheists and agnostics or skeptics that will try to point out and extract what they call Old Testament atrocities that try to indict the Christian God. Because the definition of God, hey Virginia, the definition of God would be the maximally great being, the greatest conceivable being that you can be, that you can think of. And in order to disprove that the Christian God could be that God that's out there, they point out his immorality, therefore he could not be the greatest conceivable being. Because the greatest conceivable being has to be perfectly righteous, perfectly moral, perfectly loving, all those things. But there's a kind of a contradiction where the atheists or the naturalist or materialist argument collapses. Because why is something an atrocity? Why is something immoral? Why is these things that they point out bad? Even if it was an atrocity, why is that bad? If there is no God, if there's no standard outside of yourself in which to justify your moral claim, then everything falls on itself. You steal a moral standard from God in order to prove that he doesn't exist. This is a problem that plagues them, and a problem they usually have trouble answering. People like atheists like Sam Harris and Dr. Eric Wielenberg, they know they have to try to make morality and moral duties objective and give it to a transcendent thing or abstract being in order to justify why we have objective moral duties, because morality is not subjective. It'll exist with or without mankind. All right, with that all being said, I just wanted to point out that even before we start the study, even if all of these were true accusations, the atheist or the skeptic would have no way of justifying their claim. And that's not to say that they can't act morally because they're made in the image of God, but they cannot justify why they claim the things that they do. So first off, I want to start in 1 Samuel 15. These are scriptures that are often brought up to Christians, and some Christians will often fold or back away or not really have an answer, which is okay, and that's the point of this study. So I'm going to go to 1 Samuel 15, 1 through 3. Samuel also said unto Saul, The Lord sent me to anoint thee to be king over his people, over Israel. Now therefore hearken thou unto the voice of the words of the Lord. Thus saith the Lord of hosts, I remembered that which Amalek did to Israel, how he laid wait for him in the way when he came up from Egypt. Now go and smite Amalek. Remember that name, Amalek, and utterly destroy all that they have, and spare them not, but slay both man and women, infant and suckling, ox and sheep, camel and ass. Now, I want to point out the very important part about this verse and about this subject. The first two things we'll discuss, the first two atrocities. The branch of Nephilim. If you don't know what the Nephilim is, I believe I talked about it in Sons of God, Giants Among Men in my preaching a while ago. But to give you the gist of it, Genesis chapter 6 is the the documentation of the fallen angels' cohabitation with the daughters of Adam, boring what are called Nephilim, the men of renown, the people who built the giant cities of Bashan, king of Bashan in Deuteronomy 3:11. These men were extremely tall, basically superhuman, and great in size, but also great in wickedness. They had amazing strength, breadth, and width. In the Epic of Gilgamesh, which is a kind of a spin-off of biblical truth, they put Gilgamesh 2/3 God and 1/3 man. And this is where Greek mythology also comes from, the demigod, half God and half mortal man. Now, these Nephilim, they were destroyed. The reason why the flood came upon the world and why Noah was chosen, because Genesis 6 says that Noah was perfect in his generations, in his genes, in his lineage, in his genealogy. And why is that? Neither his wife nor his sons nor his son's wife had intermixed with the fallen angels and their wickedness that they were doing upon the earth, exempt from everybody else. All right, see you later, Jaden. I think I'll be picking you up, so I'll see you then. But where's that? Okay. Everybody, all the families, all the other bloodlines, this was an attempt of the serpent to evade his punishment claimed and prophesied in Genesis 3:15, the birth of the promised seed. Now, the Christ child could not have come if the bloodline and the genealogy of the woman's seed was permeated and tainted and infused with the serpent's bloodline. So now that you've got these this disproportionate, this distorted, wicked, you want to say giant, because that's what they really were. They were basically, not basically, they were actually giants. And you've got them spreading throughout the land of the Canaanites, through the akin nations around them. And there were two eruptions, because Genesis 6:4, that in the days, i.e. the days of Noah, before and after those days, there were giants in the land. So there were two eruptions of these men of renown, what they're called. So the name that I want to point out, Amalek, it is said by most scholars, and by following and tracking the lineage and the peoples of the Nephilim, the branches of them, that Amalek was one of the descendants of these Nephilim, these giants. Hey, what's up? What's up, Elliot? In that they resided in a land next to the Canaanites. And the Canaanite people, the reason why they were slayed was because the preservation of the human race and the survival of the human race. If the Satan could permeate and taint, destroy, and corrupt all women and all seed and all womb and all umbilical cord and all genes, then there was absolutely no way that the Christ child could come. God's plan folds on itself, and the whole Satan becomes Satan is the one on the throne. God falls down, and the whole world would cave in on itself. The preservation of God's plan was the reason why all these people had to be destroyed, and why it says destroy. Let me see. Smite Amalek and utterly destroy all that they have. Spare them not, but slay both men and women, infant and suckling. The reason why it says this is because if you left one of those, then the seed would continue going. The serpent seed, the tainted genealogy, would continue to breed and breed and breed throughout history. And then, like I just said, Christ would not have been able to come. We would not have the chance of salvation. This is why they had to be completely exterminated. Now, one thing to point out as well, is it logically possible for God to murder? Now, God is who created life. The reason why it's wrong for us to murder, the reason why it's wrong for us to take life, is because we cannot give it. In fact, since Christianity is true, people never really die. They just change location. So God can change whether they're 2 years old or 82 years old. God can put them from this life to the next life anytime he so pleases. He can take me out anytime he well pleases. And it wouldn't be murder, because he's the author of life. People will point out this verse and say that it was atrocious and ghastly that God would do something like this. But God is not arbitrary. Does God give reasons, or does he just wake up and say, Amalekites, I want them dead. Canaanites, I want them gone? No, he has reasons and rationality in his judgments. And there was very good one here, because even aside from the promised seed, which was the overall plan of God's punishment, of God's salvation and reconciliation of us to him, the human race would be completely extinct. It wouldn't even exist as a race anymore. Ourselves as humans would be completely distorted, disproportionated, and completely warped out of what we were meant to be. And if evolution can weed out the weaker species, if they can weed out the ones that are bad, the ones that didn't make us survive, then why is it wrong for God to do the same thing? Because survival of the fittest, right? Darwin's theory of evolution, it weeds out the weak, it weeds out the things that would hinder our survival, and then yet atheists accuse God of the same thing and say it's bad. Now I'm going to go to another place where they'll point out is Deuteronomy chapter 7, verse 1. Deuteronomy 7, verse 1. When the Lord thy God shall bring thee into the land, whither thou goest to possess it, and hath cast out many nations before thee, the Hittites, the Girgashites, the Amorites, the Canaanites, and the Perizzites, and the Hivites, and the Jebusites, 7 nations greater and mightier than thou. And when the Lord thy God shall deliver them before thee, thou shalt smite them, and utterly destroy them. And atheists claim that this is genocide. Thou shalt make no covenant with them, nor show them mercy unto them. Neither shalt thou make marriages with them. Thy daughter thou shalt not give unto thy son, nor his daughter shalt thou take unto thy son. For they will turn away thy son from following me, that they may serve other gods. So will the anger of the Lord be kindled against you, and destroy thee suddenly. I want to reiterate again why it's important, why it was extremely vital, and why the sword of Israel was called upon to destroy the Canaanites and the Amalekites. That's easy for me to say. If they were not, let's just say, if they were not destroyed, if God had spared them, do you realize that we would not have the chance of salvation? God's entire plan from eternity past would have folded and caved in on itself. And a breach in God's plan means Satan's punishment is evaded, avoided, he escaped it. Now he's above on the throne, and God is utterly perished as a being in existence. This is why it's important. This is why God went to these lengths to destroy these people. It's completely justified, it's completely reasonable, and it's completely within his prerogative, or I would say prerogative. It's completely within his power and being to take people from one life to the next. Now, it says here, God says in verse 2, utterly destroy them, wipe them all out. But then in the next verse he says, neither shalt thou make marriages with them. Now, some take this to mean that he didn't literally mean destroy them all. And while that's a plausible approach, I would say that yes, he literally meant every one of them, destroy every single one of them, spare not one of them. And the reason is what I just gave. If one was left, then the entire, and if you intermarried with one of them, then it would spread through Israel, it would spread through the nation that would bring forth the promised seed, and then, as I said, God's plan would be a total failure. The reason why it says, neither shalt thou make marriages with them, is because verse 22 says, let me flip to it, but the Lord thy God shall deliver them unto thee, and destroy them with the mighty destruction until they be destroyed. Where'd it go? Oh, okay, I read 23. And the Lord thy God will put out those nations before thee, little by little. Thou mayest not consume them at once, lest the beasts of the field increase upon thee. So God didn't have them destroyed all at once. He said little by little. So therefore they had the chance, or opportunity was available for an Israelite to marry within them. But that's why he prohibits it. Because if you did intermarry with him, then you would be tainting the entire genealogy and spread it throughout Israel, which was supposed to bring forth the line of the tribe of Judah. Now, moving on from what's so-called genocide, I want to talk about slavery. Slavery is a common accusation to the Bible. It's brought up in several interviews. And to start the discussion about it, I want to go to Ephesians chapter 6, verse 5. My cat is meowing. I hope you guys can't hear him because that would be distracting. Come on, where's that? Okay. I promise I read my Bible. I just Couldn't find it for a second there. And these pages are so thin, I don't want to risk ripping them, like going through them so fast. Here we go, finally. Okay, Ephesians 6:5. Servants. This word servants, in the going on to more recent translations of the Bible, they translate it as slave. Servants, be obedient to them that are your masters, according to the flesh, with fear and trembling and singleness of your heart, as unto Christ. This, when we hear the word slave or servant, especially the word slave, we instantly think of American South, historical America in the South, and the transatlantic trade and kidnapping of Africans from West Africa and shipping them to the Americas for complete and total enslavement and generational enslavement. However, this is not the correct approach to approach the subject of servants in the Bible, because it was completely different. It is vastly different than what we had in the American South. In Paul's Greco, I have this written down, in Paul's Greco-Roman society, this was an economic arrangement. This was often an economic arrangement, and sometimes it was with conquered people who were therefore subordinate to the nation that they were conquered by. And an important thing to know is that it would not transcend generations. In the American South, in the historical American South, if you were born into that slave family, you were therefore a slave generationally. So your child and your child and your child would all be slaves. Excuse me. But this would not be the case in any of the biblical slave mentionings. They were often, and the slaves or the servants, they were often well educated. You got people in the upper class being taught by the teachers who were the servants. But in the American South, they prevented their slaves from having the ability to read, because then they might read their Bibles and they might question things about liberty. They prevented Bible reading. They prevented reading as a whole. And they were treated as subhuman. They were treated like animals. And this is the approach that atheist skeptics and they would take when they see the word slave in the recent translations, or they see the slavery in the Old Testament, or buying or selling and stuff like that. The Hebraic term slave is better in the King James and the further translations. It is, by most scholars, it is noted that it is how do I say this? That it's better translated and better rendered servant, not slave. And another important thing to note is this was not racially based. This whole idea about servanthood and slavery, it was not racially based in the biblical world. Now, American slavery back in the 1800s, I think it was, they constructed that social concept of race where one was perceived to be more sophisticated and exempt from the work, but blackness versus whiteness, blackness was treated as an inferior being, an inferior race. Therefore, they were subject to work and to slavery, and they could be treated as animals, being justified. Therefore, they had to construct that race concept, the superiority of one. In the Hebraic, in the days of Israel, it was not uncommon for people to sell themselves into servanthood in order to pay off debt and things of that nature. And so they were all, as I say again, they were not subject to generational bondage. And it was most often voluntary, where they would put themselves to escape out of poverty. And now the Old Testament character Joel affirms the equal status of master and servant when he says, did he not form me in the womb as he did them? talking about the masters. And it's also another thing to note that scholars like John Wright point out that Israel had an opposite attitude to their servants that Egypt did to their slaves, being Israelites, because slavery by the Egyptians and the Israelites being in a torturous, very harsh, and being beaten and whipped and worked very hardly to the inch of their life in slavery and in work and in construction. They had 400 years of this to look at, and they had 400 years of this to go through. Therefore, they knew what it was like to be treated as such, and they had a very opposite attitude towards their servants. It was make sure in Old Testament Levitical laws that they were not treated ruthlessly by their masters, and that's also very important to note. And probably the most important one where slavery in the Bible. How can you believe in a God that sanctifies and blesses the act of slavery? Well, let's go to Exodus 21:16. Exodus 21:16. And he that stealeth a man and selleth him, or if he be found in his hand, he shall surely be put to death. And that does away with pretty much all the claims that God sanctifies the trading and selling of a man. Let me read it again. And he that stealeth a man and selleth him, or if he be found in his hand, he shall surely be put to death. It was punishable by death in the Old Testament law. And this is exactly what happened in the transatlantic movement, where they literally kidnapped the Africans from West Africa and brought them over the sea and sold them into slavery, which is condemned both Old and in the New Testament in 1 Timothy 1:10. And I'll go through a few of them here. Servant and master are equally protected and one in Christ. That's Exodus 21:20, Deuteronomy 23:15, Job 31:13, Galatians 3:28, and Colossians 4:1. Luke 4:18 says that Jesus came to free the captives anyhow. And the plan of God is not social reform, but spiritual redemption. And Dr. Frank Turk uses these points. The Old Testament was never the ideal. It was the forward looking to the new covenant and the new, better testament, which would override and make this obsolete, as says in Hebrews chapter 8, I believe it is, or 9. So let's do an overview. As you notice, I've been trying to work on making these shorter. The reason, why did God destroy the Amalekites and the Canaanites and all those nations surrounding it? Because if they continue to breed, if they continue to live, if the sword of Israel was not called upon, then God's whole entire plan from eternity past to bring us back to him, to send his only begotten son, to die on the cross for us, and to be born purely of the woman and take the punishment as the innocent lamb, that would completely fold. That would completely fail. That would completely be thrown in the dumpster and shredded. And then everything, I'm talking about, if God's plan was to fail, himself as a being would collapse, literally, because he's supposed to be the greatest conceivable being. And if he fails, if he collapses, if he folds, if he is destroyed, if he's defeated, then everything just everything, literally. And then Satan gets what he wants. He avoids his punishment, and he avoids eternity in hell. And now he's the king. That is why it is justified and reasonable and plausible that God would have the sword of Israel slay each and every one of these people. Ephesians 6:5, slavery. We cannot approach it in the way that we think of slavery. The first thing that comes to our mind, the historical American South, torturing, whipping, rape, and murder, and being treated like animals. That is not, I repeat, that is not the context and the act of servanthood that is described in biblical times. It was often, and most most of the time voluntary, where they would sell themselves to escape poverty and escape themselves out of a debt. I keep itching on my foot. In Paul's Greco-Roman world, this would be an economic arrangement between the master and the servant. The servant and the master are affirmed in many places in the Bible to have equal status. I mean, in many places in the Bible. The plan of God is not social reform, but spiritual redemption. Slave trade and selling of men was prohibited, punishable by death in the Old Testament, and also prohibited in the New Testament. And now there are other atrocities that I could talk about. There's a lot that atheists and skeptics try to claim, but that would be a really long video. And as I said, I'm trying to make this, trying to get these shorter. But if you want to read more upon this, where I got the title from, really, you can read Paul Copan's "Is God a Moral Monster?" and he goes more in depth into these subjects and into the apologetics of this stuff. So I wanted to show you guys a video starring Jack Black done by Sacramento Community College called the Prop 8 musical. And Jack Black plays Jesus, and it completely mocks Christians, and it claims them as hypocrites, as not true to what they say, because Prop 8, I'm pretty sure, was the voting to make gay marriage legal. And then Christians would, of course, not side with it and not vote on it. And then the musical portrays Jesus being mocked, being portrayed outside of who he truly is. And the Christians who condemn this but ignore the Old Testament atrocities like the slavery and the genocide that they claim. I could show it to you guys, but you can just look up Prop 8 musical video and watch that people really do exclude themselves from the Christian God because of the things that they find in the Old Testament. And they got this idea that the Old Testament God is different from the New Testament God, which is completely false. The greatest wrath was not in the Old Testament. It is nowhere in the Old Testament. It's prophesied in the Old Testament, but the greatest wrath ever poured out by God is in the New Testament, and it was the wrath poured out on the cross on the innocent lamb. The musical, it was a wicked. That musical, you can watch it for yourself. It's a complete mockery. It's a complete false depiction. It's completely deceptive to who Christians and what the Bible and who God really is. So on that note, is there any questions before I close this out in prayer? Any questions? Hopefully you guys learned something here tonight. One thing I forgot to point out too is that a lot of this error of Old Testament atrocities comes in when they conflate what comes to their mind when they hear the word slave and what comes to their mind when they hear things like genocide. But God is not arbitrary. He has reasons for these judgments. They conflate the historical American South slavery with the slavery and the servanthood that's mentioned in the Bible, which is the completely incorrect comparison. All right, no questions, so I'll just close this out in prayer. If you could bow your heads and close your eyes with me. Dear Heavenly Father, we come before you and thank you for the perfect and divine word that you have, and also the perfect plan that you've had since eternity past for us to reconcile us to you and to give us the opportunity of salvation. God, we know who you truly are, and we hope in this study tonight people learned and saw the clear and true glimpse and true portrayal of who you are. We thank you for the great lengths that you went to preserve your plan and to give us that promised seed, to give us that beautiful lamb, that innocent lamb that died on the cross for us. And we thank you and we love you so much. And I pray for the guidance and the blessing and your being and power and love and light be with everyone who's watching, and everyone in Hope City Church, and everyone in the neighborhood, and I dare I say everyone in the world. We love you so much, God. Thank you for your son. Thank you for this day. Thank you for this night. Thank you for the study. In Jesus' name, amen. Hope you guys have a good week. I know I've been busy, but no right to complain. Every day is a beautiful day and a day of Jesus. Be a light. Share Jesus with someone. And I'll see you guys next Wednesday for another. We'll be talking about Paul the Apostle next week in our study in Apologetics series part 3. So I'll see you guys next Wednesday.